Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we conclude with Part 19, Oriental Alchemy, from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition, by Manly Palmer Hall, Part 3, The Sages of China. Oriental Alchemy. Taoism developed within a definite historical reference frame, passing through three distinct periods. The first phase, extending from the lifetime of Lao Tse to the beginning of the Christian era, has been defined as the ethical epoch. During this time, the teachings of the Master were held within the strict boundaries of philosophy. The Taoist sages devoted their lives to the contemplation of the universal plan and the application of natural laws to human conduct. These scholars were the scientists of their own day, and were responsible to a large measure for the rise of Chinese cultural institutions. Finding their way of life too abstract for general understanding, the Taoist philosophers formed their own schools in quiet and remote places where they instructed disciples and gained a solid reputation for integrity and insight. The second period of the unfoldment of Taoism extended from the 1st century of the Christian era through the 7th century, and has been described as the magical phase. It should be noted that this aspect of the sect did not completely end, but passed from popular acceptance to be preserved or maintained by isolated mystics and small groups. In this second period, a new type of metaphysician came to dominate the policies and projects of Taoism. Various transcendental arts were introduced, including Kabbalistic speculations and alchemy. The Chinese alchemist claimed the same objectives as his European confrere, and it is rather obvious that the Taoist, like the Hermetist, was seeking to accomplish transmutation in the sociological sphere as well as in the kingdoms of the minerals and metals. The Chinese alchemist was concerned with the mystery of longevity, and if the highly ornamented chronicles of the time be trustworthy, many succeeded in extending their physical lives far beyond the pattern of normal expectancy. The magical medicines, drugs, and simples discovered by these experimental chemists were believed to possess extraordinary virtues and to bestow numerous blessings upon those capable of working the secret formulas. In its third period, Taoism became largely theological, and this is not within the scope of the present interest. The second period of Taoism is closely associated with Chang Tao Ling, often referred to as the first Taoist Pope. This celebrated man was born in AD 35, probably in the province now called Zhejiang. It is stated that he was a most precocious child, and by the time he had attained his 7th year had penetrated the inner mysteries of the writings of Lao Tse and was familiar with the deepest philosophical and magical books. He was ennobled by the Emperor Chang Ti, but declined all worldly honor and retired to a retreat in the mountains of western China. Here he dedicated his mind and heart to the metaphysical aspect of alchemy and the cultivation of personal virtues. So profound was his mental abstraction that the immortals considered him worthy to be successful in his researches, and through their aid he succeeded in compounding the elixir of immortality. The precise instruction for this elaborate formula was communicated to him in a vision in which Lao Tse appeared to his devoted disciple and placed the treatise in his hands. While experimenting with the dragon-tiger elixir, a genie appeared to him, saying that on the Posang mountain there was a stone house, and in this house were concealed the magical writings of the 3 ancient emperors, and also a scriptural book dealing with the mysteries of the doctrine. If Chang Taoling obtained these books, he could ascend to heaven without death, providing he followed exactly the disciplines which they contained. Chang secured the writings, and having mastered their contents, gained the power of moving through the air, of perceiving things occurring at a distance, and of leaving his body at will. He practiced 1,000 days of discipline, could walk among the stars, and could command the winds and the thunders. It was because of the numerous recipes and medications which he discovered or invented that Taoism began to emphasize various aspects of healing. It is further related of Chang Taoling that, having by alchemy succeeded in compounding the pill of immortality, he took only 1/2 of the medicine because he did not wish to depart from this world and ascend to the region of the immortals until his teachings had been well established and his disciples properly instructed. His final departure into the celestial world is believed to have occurred when he had attained his 123rd year. Prior to his transition, this Taoist sage completed the final projection of the Grand Elixir and communicated his choicest secrets to his son, who also gained considerable fame. In AD 748, the Tang Emperor confirmed the hereditary privileges of the family of Chang Taoling and his descendants. Later, the Mongol emperors also took a friendly attitude and became patrons of this family. When the Tibetan doctrine of re-embodied lamas attained popularity in China, this was also applied to the descendants of Chang. Each of his successors at his decease caused his soul to transmigrate into some infant belonging to the same family. When this occurred, it was attended by miracles and supernatural circumstances through which the correct child could be identified. This brief account is based upon Mayer's Chinese Reader's Manual. The Reverend Dubose, referring to the Taoist Pope, writes, "The name of Chang, the heavenly teacher, is on every lip in China. He is on earth the vice-regent of the Pearly Emperor in heaven and the commander-in-chief of the hosts of Taoism." Whatever doubts there may be about Peter's apostolic successors, the present Pope Chang 60 boasts of an unbroken line of 70 generations. He is the chief of the wizards, the true man, that is, the ideal man as he is called, and wields an immense spiritual power throughout the land. Recent authors, commenting on Chang Taoling, take the attitude that he was after all a deceiver of the people. This judgment is based upon the elaborate lore with which his person has been embellished. Actually, nothing is recorded about him that is inconsistent with the traditions associated with celebrated adepts of Indian, Persian, Egyptian, and Greek transcendentalism. Most derogatory remarks are based upon the simple premise that miracles are impossible, and those who claim to perform them must be pretenders and impostors. Such an attitude openly assails all religions and denies traditions which have existed since the beginning of historic times. It might be wiser to examine these accounts more carefully in the light of expanding knowledge, much of which points to the unexplored inner life of man and the potential powers and faculties locked therein and susceptible to release and cultivation. Although there is every reason to believe that the Chinese alchemical tradition was indigenous and derived its authority from the broad inspiration of ancient writings, it appears more than coincidental that the practical phases of the subject should have developed in two widely separated areas at approximately the same time. J.M. Stillman notes that the earliest records of philosophical alchemy among Western people are those associated with Zosimus, Synesius, and Olympiodorus, who flourished between the 3rd and 5th centuries AD. It is known that in the 2nd century AD there was a Roman embassy to China during the reign of Antonius Marcus Aurelius. Obed Simon Johnson writes, "It is not unreasonable to believe, therefore, that during these early centuries the basic ideas of Chinese alchemy should have found their way westward to the shores of the Mediterranean, and in later centuries to regions beyond." Assuming that the mystical chemists of China were delving into the secret of scientific immortality nearly 2,000 years ago, it might well follow that their researches could have drifted along caravan routes, and in the course of time have reached the Near East and North Africa. Certainly the subject took deep root in the Arabian mind, as testified to in the Arabian Nights Entertainment and other similar works, some of which are now extremely rare. The rise of Muslim culture in Spain revived European interest in esoteric chemistry and contributed to the great era of alchemy, which extended roughly from the 14th to 18th centuries. As in China, the European writers liked to attribute the principles of their art to remote antiquity and to legendary or semi-legendary sources. The earliest speculations of the Taoist philosophers relating to the prolongation of human life emphasized principally regime of moderation and purification, not essentially different from present attitudes on health. Some superphysical overtones were introduced involving the control of breath, meditative disciplines, and the use of drugs suitable to clear the mind or to purify the body. Considerably later, transcendentalism emerged as a prominent actor, and the preparation of elixirs and magical medicines came into vogue. The second phase of the Chinese alchemical quest followed closely the European pattern. This involved metallic transmutations, the manufacture of synthetic gems, and other objectives likely to contribute to wealth and prosperity. The first Taoists were philosophers and scholars, and it is doubtful that they had any pressing interest in manufacturing gold. They were convinced that Lao Tse had revealed the pattern of all universal procedures, and they were moved by the magnitude of a vast experiment dealing with the regeneration of human consciousness. In due time, the so-called practical alchemists appeared and found the prestige which attended their efforts highly satisfactory. It caused them to be regarded as exceptionally learned or gifted persons and frequently gave them access even to the imperial court. They compounded various medicines and made innumerable promises, and being gifted with persuasiveness, managed to sustain their spheres of influence for many years. Some of these men were undoubtedly skilled, and a few may have known some part of the esoteric tradition, but their motives were not always above question, and the ends which they attained are open to speculation. By degrees, alchemy became merely a search for a scientific method for manufacturing gold and attaining physical immortality. The result was a strange and elusive pursuit which usually ended in poverty and death. A byproduct of this emphasis was the decline of Taoism in general. An elaborate literature appeared in which the latest beliefs and scientific practices were mingled and confused to the point of chaos. It is obvious that the truly enlightened scholars did not want to be identified with the foibles of the gold makers. While the real sages assumed the principle of gold to be universal and acknowledged that the seeds of gold existed in all things, they were not interested in nurturing this plant into productivity. By degrees, therefore, a separation took place among these chemists. Those possessing actual knowledge would not impart it to the unethical wealth hunters. In due time, the venerable Taoist adept withdrew from all involvement in popular Taoism, and the doctrine as an esoteric philosophy immediately began to decline. By the 8th century AD, philosophical Taoism had virtually disappeared, and the sect drifted toward its present religious position. It became a creed, borrowing many of its rituals, ceremonies, and formal structures from Buddhism. Only legends remained intimating the older concepts of the teaching. A Chinese alchemist fanning his furnace from Favier's Peking. The effect of Buddhism on Chinese alchemy was subtle but profound. It should be remembered that Chinese Buddhism is not the simple ethical doctrine taught by Gautama. When it reached China, it was already committed to an elaborate pantheon of divinities and saints. The Buddhist arhats possessed most of the magical powers which the Taoist alchemists were seeking to cultivate. The doctrine of rebirth, as taught in Buddhism, came into sharp contrast with the Chinese belief in the possibility of physical immortality. A direct result was a powerful stimulus toward the discovery of some means for continuing the life of man in this world. Although it appeared that the Taoist immortals had simply taken on Buddhist vestments, this was not strictly true. Taoism dipped deeply into materialism, and while men visualized with satisfaction the heavenly regions to which they would depart, they preferred to delay their journey until the last possible moment. There were certainly a few of the higher Taoist initiates, the real adepts of the sect, who had already retired into silence and seclusion, who found a meeting of minds with the arhats and lohans of Buddhism. Both groups recognized the yogic implications of transmutation. They knew that man himself was the laboratory in which the experiment of transmutation or regeneration must be perfected. Lao Tse's doctrine of Tao and Buddha's path to nirvana could be reconciled by the wise because the two concepts stood for the single attainment of union with eternal value. The meditative disciplines were much the same in both schools, and the real arhats also chose places of retirement and built their retreats in vicinities long associated with the Taoist sages. The enlightened Buddhists and Taoists were well aware that the public forms of their teachings were falling away from the original intentions. Truth seekers, disillusioned by the conflict of cults, were in many cases turning toward direct mysticism as the only solution. The personal experience of God or reality was cultivated under various names. At various times, the sages and arhats attempted to restore the old wisdom through reforming or redirecting the popular religion. They sent forth their disciples to call men from the errors of their ways, and to reinfuse rituals and formulas with meanings long lost or ignored. This resulted, as in Europe, in a gradual division within the structure of religion into a secret, mystical body and a revealed theological form. The first sought to ensule the second and thus become its guiding principle, reopening the door between truth and error. This procedure has always resulted in the rise of esoteric societies or secret groups holding great fascination for the more serious-minded. In the course of centuries, therefore, the belief that there was a secret world religion became widespread, and those dissatisfied with the outer structure of worship sought to penetrate into the ethereal realm of mystical contemplation. It was said that in old times the arhats and sages mingled with men and publicly taught them, but gradually this practice declined because men became ambitious, cruel and disorderly in the advancement of their material careers. The wise ones then returned to their own spheres, disappearing from their traditional places, which were soon occupied by the professors of false learning. Alchemy in China was founded in the total concept of existence, as this was unfolded in the ancient books and legends. Primordial existence contains a potential duality which is the source of the permutations or changes which are continually unfolding, mingling, separating, coming together, and by these occurrences sustaining the diversity of creation. The philosophy relating to this concept is unfolded through the I Ching, or Classic of Changes. This work and the celebrated commentary thereon by Confucius are regarded with deep veneration by the Chinese. Of this book, Dr. Paul Carus writes, "The Yi King is one of the most ancient, most curious, and most mysterious documents in the world. It is more mysterious than the pyramids of Egypt, more ancient than the Vedas of India, more curious than the cuneiform inscriptions of Babylon." In their ancient symbolism, the Chinese represented the positive principle of the universe by an unbroken line, which was yang, and the negative principle by a broken line, which stood for yin. When they united these two symbols, the compound was called yin-yang and signified the interaction of negative and positive fields of energy. This yin-yang is a central vortex present in the universe and also in the deepest and most mysterious parts of all creatures. Everything that exists is rooted in the yin-yang design, for creation implies a mingling of negative and positive principles. The unbroken line stands for strength, and the broken line for weakness. In this case, however, weakness actually means receptivity, or a capacity which is filled or fructified by the positive principle. It follows naturally that in this philosophic shorthand, yang is the principle of heaven and yin the principle of earth. Yang becomes the sun, yin the moon, and the words mean brightness and darkness. Always yang is aggressive and yin submissive, thus all creatures partake of both qualities. The aggressive principle is a kind of air, or spirit of air in continuous motion. It would be proper, therefore, to symbolize this perpetual rhythmic undulation as a male dragon writhing in space. The dragon was supposed naturally to inhabit the air, and when represented with 5 claws elements, it became the imperial symbol. When yang was revealed as the male dragon, yin spontaneously presented itself as the female dragon. Thus, with all forms in nature, the male engenders the female out of the passive principle, and no creation could exist alone. Aggressiveness cannot be separated from submission and can have no reality apart from its polarized opposite. Light and darkness are interdependent, for the concept of one cannot exist without the concept of the other. The first mingling of yin and yang resulted in the production of the great monad, referred to as the imperial heaven. The great monad is an infinite sphere of the positive mind principle, and immediately upon its production, the yin principle clothes it in an ethereal body. In this manifestation, yang, therefore, becomes the rational soul of the world and of man, and yin becomes the sentient soul of both. The sentient soul is the anima, which acts upon the subtle vehicle of the animus. All forms are compounds, and only the formless remains a simple or undifferentiated nature. In the alchemical speculations, either philosophic gold or the wise man's stone must be prepared by inducing an inner action between the two primary principles in their elemental or metallic forms. In the laboratory, yin and yang are caused to accomplish an artificial union made possible by art or knowledge. It should be remembered that the European alchemists described their process as the marriage of the sun and moon. The Chinese have an almost identical terminology, for they assign lead to the sun and mercury to the moon, and in turn conceal these elements under the symbol of the dragon and the tiger respectively. As might well be expected, the formulas of transmutation are exceedingly complicated and mysterious. As in the West, diagrams and symbols are introduced, but without the proper keys, these are worse than meaningless. The alchemist attempted to reproduce within his vessels the grand process of universal creation, hoping thus to gain mastery over the purified substances by which all living things receive their primary nutrition. Poem 17 of Chang Po Tuan's alchemical treatise. 400 word indicates clearly the use of the same type of idiom found in the writings of the Western alchemists. The dragon comes from the eastern sea, the tiger rises up in the western mountain, and change into the marrow of heaven and earth. Here, the experiment clearly relates to the union of lead and mercury. It should be understood, however, that the ordinary base substances generally known are not implied, for the alchemist is dealing with the spirits of lead and mercury. He used the phoenix to represent the volatile principle. The toad or tortoise was the true earth or primordial matter, the crow appeared as the symbol of the sun, the rabbit of the moon, and the unicorn was the universal spirit which he was seeking to capture. This is a key to the myths involving all these creatures, which are actually elements of an elaborate formula. The constant reference to purified forms of lead, mercury, and cinnabar is probably intended to remind the mystical chemist that he is dealing with a spiritual art, and not merely with a physical science. The Chinese themselves say that the philosophical garden, where these elements can be found in their most natural forms, is man's own body, in which true lead and true mercury abound, if one knows how to gather them and distinguish their attributes. The further one proceeds in the study of Chinese alchemy, the more completely he will be convinced that all phases of the art of transmutation were involved in a secret science of human regeneration. The master alchemist was the immortal mortal, for he was able to bring about any miracle that he desired, not by imposing his own will upon nature, but by understanding natural laws and assisting them to perfect their operations. According to Arthur Waley, often in the alchemical literature of the Renaissance, and later, we have a suspicion that we are reading not about material experiments, but about a spiritual quest, allegorically described in terms of the laboratory. In China, this suspicion is a certainty. From the 10th century onward, Esoteric alchemy, Waitan, gives place to Esoteric Naitan, which instead of using tangible and material substances as its ingredients, uses only the souls or essences of these substances. These souls are the true or purified mercury, sulfur, lead, etc., and are in the same relation to common metals as is the Taoist, adept, or Chen, purified, perfected man, to ordinary mortals. By the end of the 11th century, a fresh step has been made. These transcendental metals are identified with various parts of the human body, and alchemy comes to mean in China not an experimentation with chemicals, blowpipes, furnace, and the like, though these survive in the popular alchemy of itinerant quacks, but a system of mental and physical re-education. Lu Tzu wrote, "I must diligently plant my own field. There is within it a spiritual germ that may live 1,000 years. Its flower is like yellow gold. Its bud is not large, but its seeds are round and like unto a spotless gem. Its growth depends upon the soil of the central palace, but its irrigation must proceed from a higher fountain. After 9 years of cultivation, root and branch may be transplanted to the heaven of the higher genii." Although Johnson, already quoted, considers that this statement defies rational interpretation, it actually reveals the entire mystery. The field is the physical body of the alchemist. The golden germ is the seed of the soul. The central palace is the heart. And the soil is the quality of virtue. The higher fountain is Tao, or true spirit. The 9 years are the stages or degrees of esoteric discipline, and the heaven of the genii is the state of illumination. The entire account should be clear to a student of yoga. As in all other parts of the world, the alchemical tradition in China assumed that a few enlightened or skillful masters actually attained the perfection of the art. These were immediately endowed with extraordinary virtues and powers, and were regarded as the true scientific adepts. There are many legends about their wealth and their benevolence. They served the needy, supported just rulers, endowed institutions, and advanced learning. Although they disdained worldliness, they appeared abundantly supplied with ample means at all times. In some generations they were persecuted, and in more enlightened times they were applauded. Each tried to select an appropriate successor to whom he communicated the deeper of his secrets. The mystics insisted, however, that these alchemical sages were devoted entirely to the works of heaven. They alone realized that the production of a perfect government or a happy human society depended upon the same formulas as those used in the transmutation of metal. The end of alchemy was the realization of the Golden Age, when all creatures would live together in peace, worshipping the gods, honoring the ancestors, and loving one another. By this extension, alchemy became only another statement of the widespread belief that an order of human beings was working continuously for the improvement of mankind, as only those who were themselves wise were worthy to become the leaders over their brethren. So the master adept of alchemy was the just monarch, the grand master of the philosophic empire. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.